Bonjour. Good morning. Thank you for being here. This is coming to the end of the fall session of the 42nd Parliament. We have been looking at a legislative agenda that hasn't had any particular high points, but I thought I'd review what I see as the high points and the overriding commitments of the government and how we're doing. C'est presque la fin de cette session avant le pause pour le Noël. Nous avons eu une session avec pas de grandes victoires pour le gouvernement, mais nous avons les projets de loi qui sont passés et je vais faire un petit résumé de qu'est-ce qui s'est passé dans cette session. The legislative agenda of the Trudeau administration has moved along through this period. We've had far too many time allocations to shut down debate. But I really do think it needs to be said that a lot of that falls on the House leaders in the Conservative and the NDP who have not been cooperative in working with the government House leader. I think we need to fix this because I very much fear that what we're seeing is intransigence from opposition parties for the purpose of intransigence, for the purpose of adding up time allocations for use in a next election campaign. In other words, to say, Harper used time allocations, so did Trudeau. Trudeau's use of time allocations was anti-democratic. It's true, these time allocations are anti-democratic, but the context is so much one where I wish that the Liberals would actually make it clearer that they were allocating for time because they couldn't get the opposition parties to name how many speakers they wanted on a particular bill so that they could be properly budgeted for time. We've seen the movement along of an access to information bill, which is atrocious. The president of the Treasury Board, I don't know why Scott Bryson defends this bill. Suzanne Legault, the information commissioner, has made it very clear that this information legislation actually makes access to information more difficult. It's a bill that is regressive, and that's a very large disappointment. The omnibus budget bill, C-61, had very little in it that I could even question or oppose. I actually voted for it. We've seen progress on the Oceans Act, Bill C-55, and this was one of I say for the Green Party, a big moment was the acceptance of two of our amendments under the Oceans Act bill to expand the notions of why you protect marine protected areas to include protection of ecological integrity. I'm really pleased with the acceptance of those two amendments. By the way, I did have an amendment accepted as well in C-58 in the Access to Information bill, but it was only one that put a time limit on something the government had already committed to do, which is continue by legislation to make the mandate letters to ministers public. And I think that's a good step, but it doesn't compensate for the other aspects of the bill that are weak. The other really significant thing for this session of Parliament, as in any session, is where are we on our commitments to meet our Paris targets of avoiding any more than a 1.5 degree global average temperature increase. I'm afraid that since the Paris Agreement was negotiated in 2015, things have stalled. They've stalled in Canada. They've stalled globally. Where we are is we have each country made its own commitment to reduce according to its own country's requirements. Tragically, Canada, under Justin Trudeau, has embraced the same target that Stephen Harper put in place. There's no progress on the target. Then there's the question of how are we going to meet that target. The Liberals have basically put all their eggs in one basket, and that's carbon pricing. And in order to get carbon pricing from the provinces, particularly Alberta, they approved pipelines, Kinder Morgan, Keystone. They approved LNG in British Columbia to get the BC government of Christy Clark to be amenable to having Kinder Morgan pipeline. So Site C is a catastrophic decision, but it started with a catastrophic mistake of the federal government under the federal Liberals granting permits to build Site C in the summer of 2016. And now we have yesterday's decision from the BC New Democrats and John Horgan, who's individual members of his cabinet. I heard them campaigning. You've got to vote NDP to stop Site C. And now they've made a tragic decision, and it is not, as being reported in the media, economy versus the environment. This is a devastatingly stupid decision for the BC economy. It's going to put us in real fiscal jeopardy. It's going to increase hydro rates. It is, in a sense, the repetition of the mistakes made in Newfoundland and Labrador on Muskrat Falls, which is now seen as a boondoggle that is jeopardizing the solvency of the Newfoundland and Labrador government. And John Horgan and the NDP, with a chance to avoid that mistake, have gone forward to repeat it. So that's a large-scale tragedy. But the provincial actions on climate are insufficient collectively to meet our target. And the federal government hasn't yet decided. The federal Minister of Environment, Climate Change, Katz McKenna, has not yet decided to use the powers that she has in legislation to regulate, to control greenhouse gases. The federal government has not acted even as far as the Paul Martin minority Liberals did in 2005, to put in place programs that help Canadians reduce their own greenhouse gases. So something like the Eco Energy Retrofit Program is not in place, even though it was very successful, and it was in place under the federal Liberals, and it continued under Stephen Harper's Conservatives because it was popular and it worked. And we need to bring back more of the programs that get to the low-hanging fruit, improving Canadians' energy efficiency, fighting greenhouse gases by stopping waste of energy, which is, of course, waste of money. So on the climate issue, we went to COP23, which took place in Bonn, Germany, and did not bring anything new to the table. We weren't alone in that. The only government that brought a new commitment to the table was the new government of New Zealand. But the axe is going to fall very soon on this sort of happy picture that the Paris Agreement saves us. The axe will fall on that happy picture in October 2018, when the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change will report, as it was mandated to do by the agreement made by the COP in Paris, to show us what it looks like to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius, what kind of emission reductions are required to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius as the global average temperature increase above what it was before the Industrial Revolution. In October 2018, the IPCC will say out loud what everybody knows, which is that all existing government targets to reduce greenhouse gases are completely insufficient to avoid 1.5 degrees. In fact, they may take us well beyond 3 degrees or 4. And at this point, we begin to talk about whether human civilization can survive to the end of this century. These are not happy things to talk about. We have an opportunity in 2018 to turn that around. But we're going to have to see far more ambitious and aggressive actions from Canada, from our federal government, and from all the provinces. C'est je peux faire un petit résumé pour la question primordiale pour le Canada, la question de changement climatique. Maintenant, nous restons avec la même cible que était adoptée par M. Harper, la même cible vraiment faible, et en même temps, nous manquons les politiques pour atteindre ce cible vraiment faible. Nous devons faire plus, on doit faire plus, et c'est vraiment possible dans le contexte de notre le projet de loi pour les pouvoirs du ministre de l'Environnement qui elle a à ce moment pas utilisé, mais c'est vraiment possible d'utiliser les pouvoirs du ministre de l'Environnement pour les réglementations des gaz à effet de serre. Cette année, la prochaine année, 2018, c'est l'année où les groupes scientifiques internationaux vont présenter leur étude sur la question de où êtes-nous maintenant comme la planète, comme en société humaine, avec tous les cibles actuellement. Est-ce que c'est possible d'atteindre à 1,5 degré? Et c'est clair que la réponse serait non. Et on doit faire plus dans 2018. Et nous avons la chance avec le chefferie de Canada dans le G7. Pour moi et pour le Parti vert, c'est clair que 2018 serait l'année de climat. So next year will be a real climate action year, because the rubber will hit the road, or however you want to express whatever hits a fan, when the IPCC reports on where we are, where we need to be, and not just what Canada needs to do, but what the world needs to do. And in that, I'm really hoping that our Prime Minister will step up as president of the G7 and put meaningful global climate action on the agenda for the world. Et maintenant, je vais terminer. Et s'il y a les questions, je suis disponible. Thank you. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Good morning. My name is Maxim Novaik. I'm from News Agency of Ukraine. I have a question on foreign policy. It's a bit different topic, but still. This year there's been lots of developments in Canada-Ukraine relations. And what's your stance on this? Should Canada be more involved in Ukraine or vice versa, withdraw a bit from affairs of this country?
I think Canada's role in global peace and global affairs is a critical role. I ascribe to the view of Canada's powers as once described by former Minister of Foreign Affairs Lloyd Axworthy, that we exert a lot of soft power, that Canada can punch above its weight in the world. I think we need to re-engage multilaterally a great deal. Our engagement in Ukraine should also be re-engagement with Russia. We need to show the world that we're prepared to be an honest broker. So we need to defend the rights of Ukraine against Russian aggression, but we also need to be talking to Russia about long-term solutions. In other words, diplomacy and multilateralism are Canada's strengths. And I think within NATO, we need to be pressing NATO about how we achieve long-term solutions. There are too many global hotspots right now. And it's clear the President of the United States doesn't mind throwing gasoline on global hotspots. We have to do more to exert ourselves, and I have a lot of confidence, actually. I'm very impressed. I know our Minister of Foreign Affairs has a tremendously strong background in issues relating to Russia and Ukraine. But we have to do more to say to the world, we want to engage through multilateral processes to avoid conflict. We need to do more to put in place, as we have said before, on the basis of trade, on the basis of improving the human condition globally. We need to find ways to reduce tensions, reduce access to armaments, to fight terrorism collectively, and to do it in ways that enhance peace and security for the world. Now, that's a very simplistic answer to a very specific question. I don't think Canada should intervene more on the side of military aid to Ukraine. I think we need to do much more to say this is part of a European reality where conflicts should be resolved through diplomacy. It should not become a hot war. We need to turn down the temperature and advance support to civil society in Ukraine, advance development and assistance to Ukraine, and do more to reach out to Russia to say long-term solutions need to be found so that this ceases to be a global hotspot and we can turn our attention to areas where there's, we're still looking at trying to restore peace and security in Syria. Libya is still a failed state. We have regions of Africa where it's completely, where terrorists are expanding their reach. We have a humanitarian crisis in refugees from these various conflicts around the world. And we need to do much more as a country to work with like-minded countries to cool down the areas that are currently conflict zones.
So to cool down the conflicts, at the moment, Arctic is, the less tangible region in this world. Mm-hmm. And Russia accounts for 50% of Arctic candidates for 25, so it's most of the between two countries. Do you see Russia as a partner, as a like-minded country in the issues related to the Arctic?
I do. We're fortunate in that we have a multilateral agency for the Arctic with a seat at the table for Indigenous peoples. And that's a very important point, is that while Canada has a big chunk of the Arctic, as you say, the circumpolar north, so does the U.S., so does Denmark through Greenland, so does Russia, so do the Scandinavians. But we are together on an Arctic Council where Inuit peoples and nations have a seat at the table. We need to expand the work in the Arctic Council to have shared, and I'm not saying that Russia's on side with all of these issues, but they sit out on the Arctic Council as a reasonable nation participating in Arctic Council work. We need to do much more to have collaborative and again, engaging Indigenous people. We need a shared fisheries management structure for the Arctic. We need shared agreements for what we do to control extractive industries moving into the Arctic. In terms of oil and gas development, there's a huge risk because if there's an oil spill from a blown out well in the Arctic region, that probably can never clean it up. So we need to have the Arctic Council exert more of its multilateral diplomacy to negotiate shared fisheries, questions of limiting oil and gas development in the Arctic, limiting extractive activities in mining, but it has to be done collaboratively. I think unlike the Antarctic, which is a global heritage of mankind, everyone agrees no one's exploiting resources in the Antarctic. We need to think about how much of that shared jurisdiction of the Arctic can also move towards the top goal is to preserve a frozen north so we don't lose permafrost, which immediately engages all the energy policies of all the countries around the world. But we have a critical threat to the circumpolar north, and that's in melting. And we need to address that while we also look at those new industries that, frankly, melting changes the nature of our fisheries. Melting changes the nature of transit and tourism through these Arctic regions. Another key issue for Canada's north is to enhance and improve our access to emergency services. If a cruise ship goes down that's decided to go through the Northwest Passage, we don't have the infrastructure for rescue that we need to have because of melting, because of climate change, areas of the Arctic are opening up for activities that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago, and we're frankly not ready. Again, the circumpolar north question and engaging other countries, Russia's at the table at the Arctic Council. And I think we take multilateralism for granted. If we were to lose multilateral tables where we actually can talk, negotiate, develop shared plans, we'd be in a much worse situation in terms of the Arctic, in terms of North America, in terms of, if you look at the world, what would we do without the United Nations? We complain a lot about UN bureaucracy or the efficacy of the United Nations, but if it wasn't there, we'd be in a much worse place. And we need to work to develop and re-engage, because under the previous Conservative government, we withdrew from a lot of our international diplomacy. I mean, we blew off. We basically were. Harper was absolutely pleased to not have Canada win a seat at the Security Council. These engagements really matter. This is how Canada does punch above its weight. It's when we engage multilaterally and bring forward policies and initiatives that actually bring other countries on board, and they're critical. Thank you. I really appreciate people being able to come today for a short resume of what's been going on in the House as we break for January back in our ridings. Just say again that the atmosphere in the House does need improvement. We are seeing too much partisanship interfering with the work of Parliament, and I know that some Canadians may think it's absurd to suggest that politics gets into Parliament, but there should be more respect from all parties for the fact that once an election is over, we're here to work for the people of Canada. And the more we cooperate across party lines to make Parliament work for all of us, the more we engage in respectful discourse and don't heckle and listen to each other, we'll give Canadians more of the government that they want to see. So New Year's resolutions all around, but we'll see everybody back in Parliament at the end of January. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Thanks.